What's going on, guys? Isaiah or /Buddy24 here. Today, bringing you another guide in Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. And in this video, I'll be covering all of the main story bosses in the game. There are 10 bosses total in Crash Bandicoot 4, but 5 of those are main story bosses, and those will be the ones I will be going over in this video. There will be timestamps below, as always, if you need to skip ahead to a particular boss. So we'll be starting out here with boss number 1, which is Engine. He's the first main boss you face in the game, so as you might expect, he's pretty easy. The general mechanics of this boss revolve around doing a spin or slide attack on these little guys with fire coming out of their heads, and then just dodging sort of the projectiles that Engine launches towards you. And then after you hit 3 of the little fire guys, a little parkour section will sort of take place where you have to jump up, reach Engine, and then do some damage to him. He has 4 health bars, so there's basically 4 phases of this boss. It's basically just the same sort of mechanics, but 4 times, and they increasingly get more difficult. But once you kind of get the general idea of the boss in the first couple phases, it becomes pretty easy from there. Obviously, like I said, it's the first boss, so there's really not a whole lot of difficulty or stuff going on. It's going to be firing at you these green and red discs. And basically, as you can see here on your screen, the green discs you want to jump over, and the red discs you want to just crouch or slide underneath. And then periodically he will send forward those guys with fire coming out of their heads, and then you just do a normal spin or slide attack on them and send them towards the boss. Then, like I mentioned, there will be a little parkour section in order to actually reach him and do your spin attack. The parkour section does get a little bit more challenging as you progress through each phase of the boss, but that sort of like blue mask will appear that allows you to make platforms appear and disappear. Then you kind of just take your time. It gives you, I think, 15 seconds after the mask appears to collect the mask and then go and damage the boss. So definitely more than enough time. So the biggest tips and advice I can give you for this first boss is just to take your time, either focus on jumping around between rows like I'm doing here, or just you can even just stand in one row. But I do kind of like jumping between the rows, as there are certain parts where multiple discs will be launched at you, and that kind of does force you to change what row you're in. But after dodging the discs and hitting the fire guys, the actual parkour section, the part where you jump up and reach the boss, is pretty easy, as you might expect. The only different part here, as you're going to see, is on the 4th and final phase. The regular sort of narrow platforms will disappear. Then you'll have to jump between these moving platforms, kind of like Frogger in a way, and reach some of the fire guys who are more sort of spread out on this particular phase. But it's basically the same sort of idea. You just jump over the green discs. You can do what I'm doing here, which is just stand in one spot and kind of just wait for one of the fire guys to come towards you. But it's the exact same thing. Once you spin attack 3 of the fire guys, the boss will be damaged, and you'll need to jump forward within that allotted amount of time, do a spin attack on Engine, and that will be the first boss in Crash Bandicoot 4. Like I mentioned, there are timestamps below if you need to skip ahead to a particular boss, but for this first boss, definitely compared to some of the later ones, definitely one that you can beat without dying. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be cutting out the parts where I die and just kind of showing you each particular phase of the boss and telling you what you need to know. So that is our first boss there, Engine. That's for the beaten with his own drum trophy. Next up, we're moving on here to boss number 2, which is Brio. He's a little bit different than our first boss, Engine. He's going to throw these purple and green vials at you. The purple vials, as you can see, will make sort of a shock wave, which you need to jump over. Then he will, after throwing a bunch of purple vials, throw a green vial, and then that will create a monster that you'll need to do a spin attack on. It's basically just that same mechanic, but similar to the first boss, just sort of sped up each time on each consecutive phase. But once those purple sort of vials go away, it'll be the green vials that come in, and then they will spawn a monster that you'll need to hit in order to damage the boss, I should say. As you're seeing here on the 3rd phase, that's when things will really start to speed up. It'll go to that sort of inverted mode, sort of looking screen, and then the purple and green vials will come in a lot faster. After beating those first 3 phases, you'll then move over to the 4th and final phase, which is probably the hardest part of the boss. The first 3 phases are pretty quick and easy, honestly. In the 4th phase, as you can see here, the boss will transform himself into one of the larger green monsters. and then the super spin mask will spawn. All you need to do is sort of just run around the platform, run around the boss area, dodge both the shockwaves and the fist attacks that he's launching towards you. After doing that for about 10 seconds, he will sort of just be disoriented. Then you'll need to activate your super spin mask ability a couple of times to then hit the boss off of the platform. This one, compared to the first boss, is honestly maybe a slightly more challenging, but the fight itself is a lot shorter. It takes a lot less time. The only really tough part about here, I would say, is this final little health bar on the final phase of the boss. He does hit the shockwaves out and his fist attacks a lot faster, but it's just the same mechanic, same idea. Just run around the stage, dodge him as much as you can, and then when he gets disoriented, hit him with your super spin attack, and then take him out off of the platform. That is our second boss, and that is for the trophy Master Mixologist. Moving on now to our third boss here. This is the first time around you face Dr. Cortex. I would say this boss is where it starts to get at least somewhat challenging. The first two bosses aren't really much of a test, but this third boss around using the time slowing mask is definitely where things start to ramp up a bit in difficulty. The boss is going to start out here by firing a bunch of green missiles at you, and you just need to use your time slowing masks to get out in front of them and dodge them. Then he will deploy, after a period of time, this punching bot, the Punch Bot Mark II, I believe it's called. What you need to do is, after a while of dodging the missiles, the Punch Bot will, similar to the second boss, kind of become disoriented. They'll need to run up to him, hit him with a spin attack, and that will damage Dr. Cortex. There are 4 phases to the boss, similar to our first 2 bosses. But the second and third phases, where things start to get a lot more challenging. He will then start attacking you with these green discs and then these purple sort of tornado things. The best advice I can give you for this boss for all of the phases is to utilize that time slowing mask as much as possible. It basically makes it so that you can easily get in a hit, as you're seeing there on the Punch Bot, because you can just kind of run around all of the projectiles he's firing at you and then easily hit that Punch Bot without really worrying about taking damage. The third phase here is probably the hardest phase. You're going to have a combination of all 3 attacks, the green discs, the purple tornado things, and then the missiles. You just want to be sort of abusing that time slowing mask as much as possible. Using it, right when it gets off of cooldown as much as possible, sort of jump around all of the projectiles, and then keeping your eye on that Punch Bot when it gets deployed. And then right when you see the stars sort of appear above his head, you can slow down time, run up towards him, and then take him out with a spin attack. On the fourth and final phase here for Dr. Cortex, he will sort of shrink the platform and then do a flurry of all the previous attacks I've mentioned, starting out here with the missiles, but then later on here, as you'll see, he will attack you with the green discs once again, and also the purple tornado things. But it's the exact same mechanics as the first 3 phases. You're just going to kind of wait around for that Punch Bot guy to be deployed, and then just abuse that time slowing mask as much as possible. Spamming R2 as much as you can to slow down time. Different from the first 3 phases will be those little red tornadoes up in the air, which you'll need to slide underneath. But as long as you're using that time mask as much as possible, as you can see, the Punch Bot is pretty easy to destroy. So yeah, that is the third boss there, Dr. Cortex. Not the biggest challenge, but definitely a bump up in difficulty from our first 2 bosses, and that is for the trophy the 4th time. Moving on now here to our 4th boss, which are the Doctors and Tropy. This boss is a little bit different, I should say, than the other 4 bosses that are in this video. It's going to start out with sort of a parkour section, and this fight sort of is a combination of all 4 of the masks you have previously acquired up until this point. The first part of the boss, though, in this parkour section with the super spin mask, it's pretty straightforward. The hardest part about this sort of first half of the fight, I guess you could call it, is this part here with the time slowing mask. It's actually quite a bit of a challenge to slow down time here and hit the platforms at the correct time, as some of them do move pretty quickly. But it really just comes down to practice, sort of looking out in front of you, taking your time and just sort of memorizing the pattern. As you can see here, just kind of want to wait for all of these platforms to sync up, and then go from platform to platform while using your time slowing mask. And then, yeah, just make it to the now second part of the phase, which is a bit longer, a bit more challenging. For this part, you're going to be using the anti-gravity mask, and then spin attacking these little, like, I don't know what to call them, little yellow disc things that are projecting the red lasers. You're kind of just going to dodge these electric balls while also, you know, being sure to be on the right side of the platform vertically. You need to kind of alternate between the top and the bottom, and then spinning away the sort of laser yellow things. After you get to a certain point in that phase, you will then be chased by one of the doctors, Tropy, and you'll need to run in the opposite direction, kind of just doing the same thing, but a little bit faster and a little bit more challenging this time. It's basically the same mechanics. You're just kind of running horizontally across the screen in a 2D way, while activating the gravity mask when you need to in order to swap around to the other side of the platform, while then also dodging the electric balls that'll be spawned, and making sure you hit the correct yellow laser, you know, whatever projectile things. So yeah, it's a bit of a shorter fight than the third boss, Dr. Cortex, but probably a little bit more difficult, a little bit less of a room for error, but either way, once you kind of know the mechanics, once you kind of know what to do, it is a pretty short fight and pretty straightforward. And that is our fourth boss there, Dr. Tropy, and that is for the trophy Twin Sanity. Moving on here now to our fifth and final boss of this video. It is the second fight with Dr. Cortex. This boss is going to revolve around this sort of mechanic of landing on these like shock platform things. Once you kind of know where they spawn, it makes it a little bit easy. You can kind of cheese this fight in a way, but you will be jumping around between these various platforms, and you'll notice that some of the platforms disappear. You can kind of tell because there will be a little red indicator on that platform right before they go down. So you can kind of use that to your advantage. You can kind of know what to expect. Once you then destroy all of the little shock bouncer things, there will be a lab assistant enemy that will spawn, and then you'll need to do a spin attack on him in order to damage Dr. Cortex. There will also be multiple points, as you're seeing here, where a mask will be used by Dr. Cortex. You'll need to sort of dodge the mechanics of that mask while still doing the same thing, still landing on the shock platforms as you're seeing, and then spin or slide attacking the lab assistant in order to damage the boss. After you take out the platform disappearing mask, the blue mask, you will then progress into a laser phase where you will have to jump and slide over a variety of different lasers deployed by Dr. Cortex. This part isn't really too challenging. It does get a little bit more challenging here though when Dr. Cortex utilizes the anti-gravity mask. And you kind of have to do this part upside down. It's a little bit disorienting, but it's basically the same sort of idea. On the blue lasers here, you want to be sliding or crouching, and then on the red lasers, you want to be jumping over top of them. So even though you are upside down for the second part of this phase, it's basically just the same idea, the same sort of mechanics, and the same sort of button presses. Similar to the previous phases, of course, once you have dodge his attacks, there will be a little shock pad part that will trigger. Just kind of want to make your way between the platforms, even though you're upside down. It's the same sort of idea, just jump on the shock platforms while dodging some of the projectiles, and then do a spin or slide attack on that lab assistant to damage the boss. After taking out those first two masks, you will then you will then have to go up against the time slowing mask. You'll have a part here where you run around counterclockwise in order to stay on a bunch of platforms that are disappearing behind you. It's pretty easy once you kind of know that you need to run in a counterclockwise direction. And then aside from that, once you have disabled the first shock pad platform, you're going to then just sort of be aware of the time slowing down and speeding up, and then run around similarly in the counterclockwise direction once again to disable the second shock pad platform, and then hit the lab assistant after you have taken out both of those. The final part of the boss here, the fourth and final phase, which is with the super spin mask, definitely the hardest part of any boss fight in this game. You're going to have multiple things going on. You've got the lasers coming at you, you've got 4 shock pads all firing off at once. You kind of just want to take your time, go slow, look for the gaps in between some of the projectiles and lasers, and then make sure you keep an eye on the platforms that are sort of disappearing. But once you take out those 4 shock pad platforms, you're just going to have a big part here with multiple lab assistants Just jump around the lasers, avoid all the projectiles, and then take out those 4 lab assistants, and that will be the way to wrap up the fight on the 5th and final boss, which is the second part where you fight Dr. Cortex, and that is for the What Has Been Will Be Again trophy. Anyways guys, that is going to do it for today's video. This has been all 5 of the main story bosses in Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If this video helped you out at all, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Stay tuned for plenty more Crash Bandicoot guides coming over the next week. With that said, as always, I'll see you guys soon.